welcome to your very last live stream, or not live stream, your very last screencast of new information for this unit, which is your last unit of the year. So that's exciting. I mean, compared to, given situation. This is a new friend I was gonna share today. This is Ellery, my celery plant. She's got some little bit of yellow leaves going on. I think her pot is getting a little small for her, so I need to like replant her in the ground or something. But yeah, my little celery plant is growing. I also made granola last night, and I think I finally found the right temperature and time so that it's like not over baked, and it's really addicting. I've been like snacking on it for the last 2 days. So I today, later on in the afternoon, I'm gonna be meeting with Mr. Wang, and then we're gonna talk about what we're gonna do with your class next week and onwards. And then he's also going to make a video explaining how credit, no credit is going to work, the grading guidelines, all that jazz that you've been wondering about. And he's going to send an email about that shortly, maybe like this weekend or something. Yes, so that's an update about that. And sorry this video is coming out a little late to you guys. I had a I was gonna try to do it this morning, but then I had an appointment with my tax person to finish my like tax return stuff. Adult life 101. Anyway, so now that's over and I can finally do this. The one other thing that I wanted to share, so I found this. Can you see this? Do you see it? Yes, you do. Okay. So I don't know if there are any of you that, are, musicians, particularly like you like singing, or you've done choir, or you're a fan of choir or anything like that. I'm a choir person. I was in choir since I was like 7 years old, and I, did it through high school, through college, and only like now, ever since I like got out of college, did I really like stop, because now I have to go find like a community choir, and I haven't done that yet. But this guy, Eric Whitaker, he's a composer. He is my favorite composer, like choir composer ever. And he does these things called virtual choirs, where he writes, he composes a choral piece that has, multiple parts for like, girls and guys, and basically you listen to your part, and then you learn your part, and then you basically record yourself from the safety of your home. Just from your computer, you record yourself singing like that part, and then you send it in, and he basically takes all those recordings of so many people, like thousands of people sending in the recordings, and he puts it all together, and it basically forms a virtual choir. And when I first like saw his videos of the virtual choirs he had done, it's really amazing. Like, you can go look it up if you want to go listen to past virtual choirs. And he's doing another one, and he's composing a song called Sing Gently. And I just thought that, like when I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. And like, just because I really love this kind of stuff. And so if any of you are remotely, if that sounds remotely cool or interesting, I really encourage you to go check it out. The website is, at the bottom of that picture, virtualchoir6.com. I'll also put the link to the website in the description of this video. I'm gonna do it for sure. And yeah, I just wanted to share that with you in case some of you find that as cool as I do. All right. We're gonna finish up ecology. We're now, we've gone from, the biosphere to ecosystems to communities, populations, and now we're looking at behavior. This is kind of like at the organism level. How does a organism behave, and why does it behave the way that it does? Okay, so behavioral ecology. You want to know how is a behavior actually happening? Like, what is happening, mechanistically? How does behavior develop? How does it change? And why is it even there in the first place? Like, why is this behavior somehow helpful to that organism's survival and reproductive success? So, ethology is the study of behavior. And just so we have like a working definition, behavior is what an animal does and how exactly it does it. So when it comes to studying behavior, scientists have to, they ask two kinds of questions: proximate questions and ultimate questions. I'm actually wondering. Okay, sorry. Okay, so proximate questions are, concerned with the how of a behavior. So, what is actually happening in their physical body to cause this behavior, or how does this behavior play out? Like, what are the steps of this behavior, basically? So, physiological, anatomical, genetic mechanisms that cause this thing that's happening. But then we also want to understand the answers to ultimate questions, which is the why of this behavior. Why is this important? Why is this a big deal? Why has an animal decided to learn this behavior and pass it on to, the next generation? So it must somehow increase survival and reproduction. So we're going to look at two kinds of behaviors that scientists have studied, and we'll do examples of looking at proximate and ultimate answers for these behaviors. So one kind of behavior is called a fixed action plan. Fixed action plan it's a sequence of unlearned innate behaviors, which means it's genetically controlled, because it's the animal doesn't learn it, it just does it naturally. And once this action plan is initiated, it just it gets carried to completion. It's like a reflex. And these kinds of behaviors, it's triggered by something called a sign stimulus. It's some sort of external sensory sign. So that might be something that the animal or the organism sees or hears or smells or something like that, and it just triggers this reflex that just goes to completion. So this picture on the right is I think it's called like a red stickleback fish or something like that. And so the top picture, like the real picture, is a male of this species. So the fixed action plan that scientists observed in this species was that the male fish, they were really territorial and would get extremely... There's a loud car. Good gracious. Okay. All right. Loud sports car. Okay. These male fish would get extremely aggressive towards basically anything that had a red belly, basically. So normally the males only have like the red belly, and the females don't have a red belly. And scientists did some experiments, and they presented the fish with different stimulus. And so like the top picture, that something that actually looks like a real fish but is not red on the bottom, the male fish didn't do anything. But you see these other models that don't really look like realistic fish, but it's just painted red on the bottom. Then they saw that the male stickleback fish, it carried out its like aggressive territorial behavior on these things that like aren't even real fish. And so scientists concluded, the car is coming back. Okay, a lot of traffic happening outside my window, but we're gonna carry on. Scientists basically, discovered that the sign stimulus that is triggering this fixed action plan is that the red belly of anything. So the proximate cause of this behavior is the red belly of literally anything, be it a real fish or not, is acting as a sign stimulus that is causing this aggression in the male stickleback fish. So that's like the how it's happening, right? But then scientists also want to know, the ultimate cause. Like, why is this important? Why does this fish have this behavior? And the ultimate cause is that, since only males really have that red belly and females don't, then this hardwired aggression towards other male sticklebacks that will have that red belly, it basically improves the likelihood that the male stickleback will be successful in reproducing, and it keeps other males away. So it's helping to increase the success of the male stickleback fish's reproduction, right? So that would be like the ultimate cause of like why is this behavior even like important? Okay. Imprinting is another behavior that has been studied. We usually see this with like geese or ducks or other birds, and once imprinting happens, it can't be undone. Imprinting it occurs during a very specific period during the baby bird's development, usually like right after they like start to open their eyes, and it's innate, it's unlearned, so it's genetically hardwired. And the stimulus is some sort of like environmental movement that's providing the stimulus for this imprinting. So like for geese, it would be the action of like the mom moving away from its babies, and then the babies recognize that as the imprinting stimulus, and then they follow after mom. And this when experiments were done on this, if a human moved away from the babies like right after they started to open their eyes, they would assume, okay, that's mom, because that's the person I see moving away from me, so they would imprint on a human. And that's what you kind of see in this picture, that these little babies are following a person instead of an actual mom instead of their actual mom. So the behavior in question is that baby geese are gonna imprint on their mom when they see her walking away, and then they'll just follow her, and then that's how they learn, okay, this is mom. The proximate cause is just how is this actually happening? So very early in their development, pretty much right after they start to open their eyes, they're going to see their mom moving away, or anything moving away, and then decide that triggers their imprinting behavior, and then they start following whatever it is that was moving away, and they now recognize that thing as mom. And the ultimate cause for this, like, why is this important? Like, why does this somehow increase their chances of survival and reproductive success? If geese imprint on a mother and follow that mother around, and then they get taken care of more often, the mom can teach them skills and feed them and provide for them, and so they'll have a greater chance of survival. And so that's why this behavior is genetically coded and passed down in generations. Okay, so habituation is another interesting behavior, and habituation is kind of like desensitization. So something that used to cause a response, some sort of stimulus that used to cause a response. An animal eventually learns that, like, oh, nothing bad happens, there's nothing threatening about this stimulus, and so they stop responding to it, basically. And it's kind of like the whole like that the boy who cried wolf, and then the townspeople basically stopped responding to him, and then a wolf actually came, and then like the townspeople like didn't listen to him because they basically stopped responding to his stimulus of crying wolf. That's basically habituation. And so in this picture, these pigeons, maybe at some point in time they used to be really they had responsiveness to, like, human proximity, but now they're kind of like, oh, nothing's gonna happen to me, and then they just come in and become more and more aggressive. And so this is an example of learning, where an animal is learning that something in its environment actually isn't a threat, even though it may have seemed like one at first. So this is an example that not all behavior is genetically coded. Some behavior develops just like because of the way we interact with our environment. And so what we see is that behavior is actually there's that old, like, well, at least when I was in school, like, one time I had like a prompt in some class that was asking us to argue whether or not behavior is more nature or nurture. So the whole nature versus nurture debate. And really, behavior is a result of both. It's a interaction between genetic and environmental factors. And some behavior is caused by your genes, but then your environment can also affect your behavior and help you learn new things. And then that further, like later on, can affect your own genes or the genes of that species. Okay, so we're going to take a look at a few different behaviors that are examples of both, genetically induced behaviors and environmentally induced behaviors. So both of these examples are they're kinds of movement. They're behavior that's based on movement, and these movement behaviors are genetically directed. It's called directed movement. So in the first example, a sow bug, I called them roly-polies when I was younger, but anyway, the sow bug, it kind of does this weird, like, it will basically move around and turn and make little, like, wiggly paths, and at least when it's out in a dry area. But once it finds a moist area, like maybe under a leaf or under a log or something like that, it'll stop moving, it'll stay still. And this is a genetically induced behavior, because basically by moving around a lot when it's in a dry open area, it's increasing its chances that it's going to find a moist environment where it'll be more protected and it can survive better. And then in the bottom example, we have a picture of trout, and trout exhibit this behavior where they basically face themselves towards it, like they face upstream, and so they'll face the direction of the river current, and this basically helps them, like, be in a better position to, like, for food to basically come into their mouth, right? Because then the food that is flowing downstream will flow right into the trout's mouth. So this is another example of an innate behavior. It's not learned. It's just sort of like hardwired into them to do this, and it helps increase their chances of survival. Communication, a lot of times, is also genetically coded. It's some types of communication are innate. They're not learned. They're just sort of instinct. So a signal, just to go over some terminology, a signal is anything that's going to cause a change in another organism's behavior. And so communication is basically, one organism is transmitting a signal, another organism receives that signal and then responds to that signal. So an example of a communication behavior that is just sort of, genetically induced for these minnows is So minnows have what's called an alarm signal. It's sort of a chemical response that a minnow will produce if it's injured or hurt or threatened or something. And so in the first picture on the left, you see the minnows are just swimming freely, they're having a good time, they're all chill, and then suddenly one minnow starts to release this alarm signal substance, and then all the minnows, they receive the signal of the alarm chemical, and then they all like flock to the minnow that is hurt or injured or threatened or something, and they basically all come to rush to protect this minnow, and they like stop moving and everything. So that's an example of a communication behavior that's just sort of an innate communication for these minnows. But our environment also helps teach us a lot of new behaviors. So learning from our environment is just, is one way that our behavior is, continuously shaped by our environment, right? Like you have to learn, oh, like this thing is dangerous, or this plant makes you sick, don't eat this plant. It's not always, we don't always have like a hardwired like, oh, don't eat whatever it is. So, or, this is the best way to find this plant. Like a lot of behavior has to be learned. So learning is experience-based, it changes your behavior. So two kinds of learning that we're going to talk about are both forms of associative learning. And so associative learning is basically you're linking some stimulus with something else. So basically you're associating two items together, two stimuli together. So the first kind of learning that we're going to talk about is classical conditioning. So you can see on the right, the classic Pavlov's dog experiment. So with classical conditioning, you're taking an automatic response, so something that is a genetically coded like response behavior, and you're teaching the organism is learning to associate that response with a new stimulus. So an innate stimulus in this case. So with a dog example, let's see. So in picture 1, the dog has a unconditioned response to food, right? So it will start like drooling, salivating, when it sees food. So that's an automatic response. The dog did not learn, oh, I should salivate when I see food. That's just automatic. And then what Pavlov did was he would kind of, make a noise using a tuning fork. And normally, if the dog hears the tuning fork, there's no response because the dog doesn't know what this tuning fork means. It doesn't mean anything to the dog. But if Pavlov always rings the tuning fork every time the dog is about to eat and he sees its food, then the dog starts to think, oh, the tuning fork is rung when I'm about to get my food. So then when Pavlov rings the tuning fork, after the dog has already learned this, Pavlov rings the tuning fork and the dog starts salivating because it's now associated like, oh, whenever I hear this sound, I get food. And so after all of this conditioning, the dog now has linked a random arbitrary stimulus, the tuning fork sound, with an innate stimulus of food, and the food is what causes that natural response of salivating. And now because the dog associates the food with the sound, it thinks like, oh, the sound means I'm being fed, and so the sound now causes the innate response of drooling and salivating. So that would be classical conditioning, where you're taking something that's automatic and you're kind of associating it with an arbitrary stimulus. Operant conditioning is about us learning from our choices. So the thing about operant conditioning is it's a voluntary action that's becoming associated with with a consequence, and usually like a reward or a punishment. So with classical conditioning, it's an automatic response that's being associated with something else. So operant conditioning is a non-automatic behavior, something that you choose to do. So, as humans, as we're growing up, we're always learning from our own like choices. Like, oh, this is what happens when I procrastinate and I don't do any of my AP Bio work, and then I'm behind and I get stressed out when I like suddenly need to do all my work at the same time, and then I don't do as well in my test, and then my mom gets mad at me. And so then, maybe we learn from that one time that like, oh, procrastination has a lot of negative consequences that I don't really like, and then maybe we learn not to procrastinate anymore, she said, hopefully. And so, in this example, on this picture of this like poor coyote, it basically just learned, oh, maybe I shouldn't go after porcupines. Maybe I shouldn't try to mess around with eating a porcupine, because when I do, then I get its quills stuck in my face, and it's painful, and I don't like it. So it's now associated porcupines and maybe anything that looks like a porcupine with pain, and then it just stays away from those kinds of animals from now on. So that would be an example of operant conditioning. We are learning, oh, don't do this thing because it causes bad consequences, or do this thing because it results in a reward. And so, as animals learn from their environment, and like different patterns of behavior are kind of like, learned throughout multiple generations. Natural selection, the behavior that is learned from the environment, that can start affecting the genes of that species that is living in that particular environment. And so natural selection can start favoring certain behaviors that were once maybe learned from the environment. And natural selection will start to select for behaviors that will increase your survival and of course increase your chances of being successful at reproduction. When scientists are looking at how have certain behaviors been shaped by natural selection, two of the main categories of behaviors that scientists will look at is parenting. How do different species like develop different parenting styles, and also mating, like how do different species choose their mates, or how does a female choose their mate. So with parenting, parenting can definitely have a positive impact on whether or not the offspring survives, but different factors will come into play, depending on the environment, that will help to dictate whether or not both parents are going to take care of the offspring, or maybe only one parent's going to take care of the offspring. So as an example, so let's say maybe like squirrels, a type of squirrel that's living in a certain environment. Let's say that in that specific environment, there's not a lot of food everywhere, so it's difficult for just mom to find food and feed the baby squirrels. So then it's kind of difficult to take care of the baby squirrels with just one parent. Then maybe because of the environment, then that squirrel species in that environment starts, it develops that both parents are going to take care of the baby squirrel. So then you have both parents that are taking care of babies. But maybe in a different environment where food is plentiful, mom can take care of the squirrel babies all by herself, and the squirrel babies are okay. Then what you might find is that though that squirrel species in that particular environment, those squirrels and the dad squirrel doesn't really stick around to take care of the baby squirrels, because the dad squirrel is will still have reproductive success even if he's not taking care of the baby. So he can go off and go find another squirrel to mate with and then further increase his, reproductive success. So that's an example of how, like, depending on the environment, natural selection can favor different parenting styles that will increase the chances of reproductive success. Differences in selecting mates is also something that kind of develops based on environment, and natural selection can favor different mating preferences. A common example that I've been seeing a lot lately from this nature documentary that I've been watching is that birds can have some really wild, male birds can have these really wild dances that they have to do for females to try to impress them. Or maybe you're familiar with how the male peacock is the prettier one. The female peacock tends to be pretty plain, and so a female might select her mate based on how pretty or how decorative the male peacock is. And while at first it seems pretty arbitrary, like why do they care about how pretty the male bird looks or whatever? But what scientists had found was that in some instances, maybe the plainer male peacock, it had showed signs of health issues, like it was less healthy because it was not as vibrant. And so basically these mating selection behaviors that genetically develop over generations, it's kind of the female's way of trying to pick a mate that is healthy and is going to help her reproduce healthy children. And so that is ultimately increasing the chances of reproductive success, because you want to be passing on favorable traits to your offspring, right? I wasn't entirely sure what the purpose of this slide was, but from my best guess of what I can gather from this picture, this is another example of bees, they're using communication to kind of more efficiently increase their chances of survival, because they're communicating to the other bees in their hive where there might be a source of really good food, using these different dances, like the round dance and the waggle dance. And so this is just another behavior that's developed, that's kind of been favored over generations, that is increasing the chances of survival, because it's helping other members of that community, of that population, find sources of food, which will increase their likelihood of surviving. Okay, and then the last thing we're going to talk about is altruism. Altruism is kind of a, when scientists first started seeing this behavior, they were really surprised, because altruism is basically, one organism doing something that is, maybe risking that organism's life, but is to protect another organism. So scientists were like, oh my gosh, these organisms are being selfless? Who would have thought selflessness in the wild? And so they could not understand it. Why is an organism going to risk its life? And basically, how has this behavior survived, where it decreases the chances of survival and reproductive success? Because obviously, if you die, you cannot be successful at reproducing. And so, as scientists continue to study these populations, they learned that, if an organism is protecting another organism or another group of organisms that is family, as in their sisters or mom or brothers, or actual family, then there's a chance that if they survive, some of the genes that would have been represented in the organism that is risking his life, those genes will still get to be passed down if the other members of the family survive. So, altruism might decrease the fitness, the survival rate or reproductive success of the individual, but because it's increasing the fitness of other individuals that organism is related to, it's still indirectly helping the original organism. So the idea of what scientists discovered in altruism, I think it's called Hamilton's rule, is that if related individuals are helping each other, it basically helps keep the genes in that population surviving. So basically, it's like an organism might sacrifice himself or risk his life for the greater good of his family. So his family survives, and if his family survives, then his genes in some portion still get to live on in the next generation. And that's how scientists have kind of justified this kind of weird, non-selfish behavior in other organisms. So actually, this section on altruism, it's like, as I was reading this in the AP Bio book, I suddenly remembered that I had read this before when I was taking AP Bio, because I remember that one section in the book where it's talking about it's using Hamilton's law to help you decide whether or not you should rescue your drowning brother who's in the ocean and may drown or whatever. And I just remember it because my cousin is 2 years older than me, and we'd both taken AP Bio, and we started concocting all these crazy theoretical situations and then doing the math to see whether or not it would be worth it to rescue one of our own cousins. Anyway, so that's just a funny thing that I suddenly remembered while I was reading this. But yeah, that's the last slide. That's the last part of this lecture on behavior. So congratulations on making it to the end of your final unit. And you will hear more about what's going to happen with the grading guidelines and what we're doing next week and whatnot soon, after I talk to Mr. Wang. So I hope you have a really nice weekend. If you do end up doing that virtual choir thing, you should definitely let me know, because that'd be really cool. So I'll talk to you soon. Bye.